Hey guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Becca and today I have my mid-November wrap up. So I'm filming this video quite early on Sunday morning, which is the day that you're going to be seeing this, which is something that I don't normally do. I like to be a little bit more prepared, but my schedule got away from me. So here we are early on Sunday morning. I'm wrapped up in my cozy Emposia blanket. I will put the link to Emposia blanket down in my description box if you guys would like to pick one of these up. They are super cozy. They come with hoods as well. So if you're looking to pick one of these up for yourself or as a gift for Christmas, the link will be down there along with my discount code. I have a code that gives you guys 10% off these, which is Becca10. And if you are thinking of getting these as a Christmas gift for anybody, I believe that the cutoff date is the 30th of November for guaranteed Christmas delivery. So for my wrap up, I've currently read 5 books in the month of November. I am a little bit surprised because if you guys saw my November TBR and then my first vlog of November, I said that while I had a really hefty TBR, I was going to do a minimum of 100 pages per day just because I didn't want to overwhelm myself. So I kind of just accepted that there would be books on my TBR that I didn't quite get to. But even though I have only been doing the 100 pages per day, I have still managed to read 5. So as usual for a mid-month wrap up, these will be reviews of the books that I read in the first half of the month, and there will be no statistics in this video. They will come at the end of November. So the first book that I read in the month of November was one that I started in October. I did read about half of it this month, and that is My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. So this is an adult contemporary that is told in 2 timelines. We are following a woman called Vanessa in the year 2017, and we also have a past timeline that starts in the year 2000. This story very much centers on abuse, pedophilia, and sexual assault. It is not a comfortable read at all. When Vanessa was a teenager, she attended a boarding school where she was groomed by one of her teachers. So the present day timeline in 2017 is set on the backdrop of the Me Too movement, and a girl who was a student of the same teacher has come forward, posted on social media, and explained everything that has happened to her. And Vanessa never believed that she was assaulted. It is a very psychologically complex story because there are elements of Vanessa that recognizes abuse and elements of Vanessa that don't. So this girl has come forward in 2017, told everybody what happened to her with her teacher, and she is looking for other people, Vanessa especially, to come forward and support her claims so that something will actually be done about it. But Vanessa wants nothing to do with this. She does not want to incriminate her teacher at all. She is still in contact with her teacher and she does not believe that he abused her. So this is a very uncomfortable read. It is also sexually graphic. It's not incredibly graphic, but there is no doubt about what is happening in this book. It doesn't fade to black. You follow Vanessa through, like literally through the experiences as she is being sexually assaulted. So please bear in mind, if you do want to pick up My Dark Vanessa, that it is deeply uncomfortable. I gave this book 4 stars. I can't say that I enjoyed it because reading it was not an enjoyable experience, but I do think that it is a very good book. And aside from looking into the abuse and sexual assault in this story, it also looks into trauma and the long-lasting psychological effects that this kind of abuse, or any kind of abuse really, that you suffer in your early years can affect your present day, like your sense of self-worth, the way that you look at romantic relationships and look for romantic relationships. And I did think that that was very interesting. I also liked that this was very therapy positive. So I would say if you are a fan of reading books with dark subject matters and you are okay with uncomfortable reads, then I would definitely recommend this. Just bear in mind that it is very uncomfortable, and please look up a full list of trigger and content warnings before you go into this. And this was a gift from Kira, so thank you so much, Kira, for sending this to me. I then made it into my official November TBR, the first book of which was Words of Radiance Part 2 by Brandon Sanderson. I am a co-host for the Stormlight read along that was created by Catherine from Catherine Reads. Words of Radiance was the book for October. Our live show for this is going to be on the 28th of November at 3 p.m. Eastern time, which is 8 p.m. GMT, and it's going to be on Jade from Jaded Readers channel, so I will put a link to the live show in my description box so you guys can set your reminders if you would like to join else for that. So this is just the second half of Words of Radiance, which is the second book in the Stormlight Archive, which is one of the series in Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere. Now I have been giving you guys my variation of a synopsis on this. However, I watched Cody's Wheel of TBR video a few days ago, and she has actually found a synopsis on Reddit that sums this up and the actual themes of the series much better than I was doing with my initial starting point of the series. So the Stormlight Archive is an adult epic high fantasy that is set in a world that is constantly ravaged by these really powerful storms. And in this series we are following a band of magical and legendary knights with powers who are reforming to try and stop the apocalypse. I think that is the synopsis that Cody gave. But essentially some of the main characters in here are manifesting powers that they thought were long forgotten and belonged to this group of heralds and knights radiant. As the plot is developing, these characters are discovering that not all is right in the world and they may actually be the ones who have to band together to stop it. I'm really enjoying this series now. The first book in the series is very, very slow, and while I enjoyed it and I enjoyed the depth, it is very, very slow paced because it is set up for what will eventually be a 10-book series. Words of Radiance I enjoyed a lot more because I got answers to some of the questions that I very much had at the end of Way of Kings, and as well as that, the plot and the pacing does pick up a little bit. Just from the first chapter of Words of Radiance Part 1, Words of Radiance is so much more compelling. It's interesting how Brandon Sanderson has the power to do that. Like, he gives you a really slow setup, and then from the very beginning of book 2 he's like, okay, let's get into the good stuff, and immediately you just want to read and know more. I found myself flying through both parts of Words of Radiance, but especially the second part, and considering how much I struggled with Way of Kings, it was no problem for me to read like 150 pages at a time of this second installment. Something else that Brandon Sanderson does that I kind of appreciate and hate at the same time is that when you get to the end of one of his books, the plot will wrap up, we'll have the main conflicts of the book and all of that will wrap up, and then he will go through pretty much every main character's perspective and set them up for where they're going in the next book, which leaves you dying to pick up the next book in this series. So I love it because it keeps me interested and wanting to continue, but I hate it because I have a TBR, and because I'm doing live shows for this, I can't start Oathbringer until we've had the live show because I don't want to confuse myself. But yeah, very much enjoyed this installment, gave it 5 stars. Would recommend that you pick up the Stormlight Archive, but I would also recommend that you read at least a few other books. If you don't want to read the Cosmere in order, that's fine, you don't necessarily have to, but I would recommend that you pick up at least a couple of Brandon Sanderson's other books before you go into the Stormlight Archive, because it is by far his most complex, his longest and most dense work to date. This was not the next book that I read in November, however I may as well talk about it now because I did read Edge Dancer by Brandon Sanderson. So this is Arcanum Unbounded, which is a bind up of the majority of the Cosmere novellas. This was a gift from the lovely Tracy. Thank you so much, Tracy, for sending this to me. So at this current moment I have read the beginning part of this, which are the Elantris novellas, and I've also read the last 140 pages, which is Edge Dancer. So Edge Dancer follows a character that we are introduced to in Words of Radiance. I believe it's the very last set of interludes. So as I mentioned, we have all of these knights, and there are, I believe, 10 orders of the Knights Radiant, one of the orders being the Edge Dancers. So Edge Dancer follows the one character we know of so far who has the Edge Dancer abilities. So this novella was pretty much just an introduction to her character. Her name is Lift. She is a very young girl, and we are introduced to her in Words of Radiance, but this just fleshed her out a little bit, gave a little bit of insight into her background, and also a little bit of information on her powers, like how her powers manifest and what their purpose may be. And we also found out a little bit of her agenda, like what she actually stands for and things like that. I gave this novella 4 stars because there were elements of it that I did really like. I liked the information that we got in here that ties to the Stormlight Archive as a whole. I liked how it did actually open the story a little bit, because there is an element in here that I don't believe we've been introduced to in the core books of the series so far. I also really like the dynamic between Lift and the other main character in this story. Essentially, Lift has a really kind of flamboyant attitude in terms of nothing she really does make sense. She's 13, she's an urchin, so she pretty much just does what she wants. Her main focus is food, like she always wants to eat. And the other main character in here is kind of like a guidance figure, so that character is always questioning why she is doing what she's doing, and none of her reasons actually make sense. And I did really enjoy that dynamic between the both of them. However, story wise, I don't like short stories to start off with. You guys know that about me. And while I am enjoying the Stormlight Archive so far, I'm really loving the world, I'm really loving the plot, my favorite things are the characters, and I'm definitely enjoying it more when I'm following certain characters because what they are doing deeply interests me. So I just was not as interested in what Lift is doing in this novella. It's even set in a completely different part of the world. So while you're learning a little bit more about the world and the magic, the actual plot is not inherently connected to what is going on where like Kaladin and Dalinar are. Something else that I did possibly also really like about this though is that I do think that I noticed another connection to the Cosmere as a whole. I can't say for sure, but I think that this contains a link to Mistborn. If any of you guys are big Sanderson fans, then please let me know if I'm right about that without spoiling anything that I haven't read yet. I believe that Sanderson wrote this novella because Lift is going to become a prominent character later on in the Cosmere, and he wanted to take this time to establish her character and introduce and explain some of the things that are a key part of her character, which isn't as easy to do when she's already joined the main narrative of the series. So I think that when I get to the point where Lift does join the main narrative, I will appreciate having already read this a lot more. But at the moment, just as a short story, a novella, I very much enjoyed it, but I gave it 4 stars because I wasn't too intrigued by it and the actual storyline of it. The next book that I read was my first Believathon book, which was Hollowpox, The Hunt for Morrigan Crow by Jessica Townsend. I love this series. I love this series so much, and the 3rd installment was definitely no different. So this is a children's series that follows a girl called Morrigan Crow who is a cursed child. On the eve of her 12th birthday, she is destined to die. However, at her town's annual bidding day, which is where influential members of the community come to bid on children to take as apprentices, Morrigan is whisked away to the city of Nevermore by a man called Jupiter North, who enters her into a series of magical trials to gain entrance to the Wondrous Society. So every book in this series has a kind of separate plot line that runs through it but ties to the main plot, and book 3 focuses on the Wunimals of the world, which are animals that can speak and communicate. They are more sentient, if you will, and the Wunimals of the world are being infected by a disease called Hollowpox, which causes them to turn very aggressive and attack people, and shortly after that they give up, collapse, and are left hollow. So Morrigan and the rest of the characters and the whole city of Nevermore are trying to get to the bottom of this mystery, while Morrigan is still following the main plotline of the Wondrous Society. So I've said it 1,000 times, I'll say it again, I love the world in this series. It is so imaginative. It is just a wonderful, wonderful world to experience. Jessica Townsend has done such a good job on this, and I love this setting because it seems real. Nevermore seems like a place that you could actually go to if only you knew how, like if only you had the capabilities of going to Nevermore and the Wondrous Society. It feels so tangible because Jessica Townsend has done such a good job, and it's not over-explanatory, it's not overly descriptive, but I can't even explain how she's done it, but it feels so real and like such a wonderful place. Something else I'm starting to appreciate about this as well is that in this book Morrigan is 13, and there are going to be at least 3 more books in this series. Time does pass very quickly in these books as well. This one starts off in winter and passes through at least the following summer, so Morrigan is very much going to age up through the series, and you can see very subtly how things are changing because of Morrigan's age as she grows. So I'm very interested to see how that is going to continue as she ages through her middle teenage years. Another thing I appreciate is that Jessica Townsend does not dumb this book down because it is aimed at children. She uses words that will not be familiar to children, and she doesn't overly explain them again. She will give it a little bit of context, and she leaves the reader to then go and work out what this word is, or ask somebody or look up what this word is if they are unfamiliar with it. And I just think that this series is beautifully written. I think it transcends all age barriers. I think there is joy joy to be found in these books for anybody of any age who reads them. It is also a very diverse series. There is a female-female relationship in here. As this is middle grade, it's not something that is the main focus. It is just mentioned, but it was still wonderful to see. And yeah, I gave this 5 stars. Not a single complaint aside from the fact that the Waterstones editions are unreadable because the beginning and the end pages are in the wrong order, but that of course is not a reflection on this story. And yeah, would highly recommend you pick up this series if you haven't already. And then the final book that I've read so far in November, I blew through in 24 hours, which I did not expect. I knew that this would be a quick read, I just did not anticipate how quick, and that was Horror Store by Grady Hendrix. This was a gift from Bev when I hit 10k subscribers last year. Thank you so much, Bev. I really enjoyed this. This is now my second book from Grady Hendrix. The first one I read in September, and that was My Best Friend's Exorcism, and both of those books are pretty much my first experiences with adult horror. So Horror Store takes place in a big furniture store that is an intentional knockoff of IKEA called Orsk. So IKEA does exist in this world, and Orsk has sprung up to pretty much undercut them. They are a very successful company, and the store that this novel takes place in has been around for 11 months. It's a relatively new store. Our main character in here is Amy. She has been an Orsk employee for a while, and when the store opened, she was transferred into it. She doesn't really like working in this store, so she would like to transfer back to her old one. However, she's not very good at her job because she's very jaded. She isn't super into the retail employee existence of being like super chipper and bigging up the products, even though as an employee you know their faults. And so she does not get along with the deputy manager, who is Basil. He's so annoying. He very much believes in the Orsk life. Like, he doesn't just come to work and bring it, he lives this life. He is super into what Orsk stands for and being like the model retail employee. So Amy is pretty much just trying to avoid Basil as much as possible so she doesn't get fired before her transfer comes through. Things have been going a little bit strange in this store. The employees turn up to work in the morning and there's like stains on the furniture, there's glasses and frames that are smashed, and they've all kind of assumed that somebody must be sneaking into the store after dark and vandalizing it. So Basil asks Amy and another employee to stay behind after dark and work a night shift. This agreement works perfectly for Amy because she'll get paid cash in hand, which means she can catch up on the rent she owes to her roommates, and Basil has also said that he will bump her transfer through so she can get out of there as quickly as possible. So Basil, Amy and another character called Ruthann agree to work this overnight shift, and it quickly becomes apparent that the damage in the store is not in fact vandalism, it is the work of ghosts. So the thing about Grady Hendrix that I've noticed from the 2 books that I've read is that he takes kind of a fun or unusual concept. Like, the formatting of this book is like an IKEA catalogue. You have all of the furniture bits in the beginning. Like, before the story starts, the actual beginning of this is pretty much a catalogue, and we also have the same kind of thing at the end as well. And the beginning of every chapter is a diagram of the furniture with the little description. It tells you what colours it comes in and its catalogue number and everything. So he does have these kind of gimmicky concepts, which leads you into believing that it's going to be like a fun gimmicky horror. But in both of the books I've read from him, things do get quite sinister and quite grim pretty quickly. I gave this 4 stars. I really did enjoy this. It is so compelling. I knew it was going to be a quick read because it's only 240 pages, but the actual text on the pages is laid out like a catalogue, so you have these enormous margins, so there's not actually that much text on each page, and I absolutely flew through this. As this is horror, there are a lot of trigger and content warnings for this. I'm not going to give all of them here because when you get into the horror genre, they always contain trigger and content warnings, and to give them all away does spoil it. But what I will say is that there is a lot of gore in here. I'm not particularly squeamish, and there are not a lot of content warnings that bother me, but there is one to do with gore, like one specific body part that just really gets me, and it was mentioned like multiple times in here, and I'm not a fan. I'm just really not a fan. So it did make me feel a little bit nauseous while I was reading some of this, but I do think that it was really enjoyable as a gory ghosty horror can be. The reason I gave this 4 stars and not 5 is because I do feel like it was a little bit too fast-paced in parts. There are quite a few characters that are doing this this overnight shift, including some that aren't actually supposed to be there. And I felt like the main of this story focused on just a handful of them. One of them was mentioned during this overnight shift when things started to get a little bit weird, and one of them was very briefly mentioned, and then we never kind of returned to that character throughout the rest of the book. And I do think that it did wrap up a little bit quickly as well. Something that I did enjoy about this that I don't think is necessary, like I'm glad that Grady Hendrix did it, but it's not something that I expected going into it, and I would have been kind of fine if it hadn't been included, but I do appreciate that it was, is that Grady Hendrix went into where these ghosts came from, like the reason that this store is haunted, and gave a good wrap up of that with a little bit of, there's like mixed media in here as well that goes into the haunting, and I did appreciate those little tidbits that gave like the background of the haunting, as opposed to it just being these characters being terrorized by the ghosts that are in this Orsk store. So overall, I think I would recommend Grady Hendrix. I've now read the 2 books by him that I was most interested in. However, as I have given them both 4 stars and really enjoyed them, I am going to be reading some more from Grady Hendrix. I think next I will try the, is it the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires? And then after that one, I will go with We Sold Our Souls, which is the one that I'm least interested in. But yeah, would recommend this book, would also recommend Grady Hendrix as an author. I was gonna say if you like horror, but as I'm not really experienced in the horror genre, I can't say like how good it is for horror, but I definitely enjoyed it. So I am participating in 2 readathons in November. The first one I've already mentioned, that was Believeathon, which I've currently read 1 book for. I have 3 more books for Believeathon on my TBR. I am also participating in the Clear Your Shit readathon, which all 4 of these books were for. So we had Hollowpox, to read a book that features an animal. We also had Edge Dancer, which was to read the shortest book on my TBR. We had Words of Radiance Part 2, which was to read a book with a found family, a group, or a heist. And then Horror Store was to read a scary book. My current read is The Mad Shit by Robin Hobb. I only started it this morning, so I've only read the prologue, but that is the next book I will be reading. Also the biggest book on this month's TBR, so it is going to take me quite a while. It's around 900 pages, but I have made at least a start on that. And then that is also my final Bookopoly book. So after that, I still have things to read. I have a buddy read, I have my Patreon Inner Circle book pick for the month to read, and then I also have like read along books and the rest of my Believeathon TBR and things like that. But so far so good in November. Please let me know down in the comments if you have read any of these books and what you thought of them. If you're participating in any readathons, especially if they're the same ones that I am, let me know what your progress so far for those readathons have been. But aside from that, please don't forget to like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you wanna. If you head into my description box, you will find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram, and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish body butter and candle website, the Instagram for that, and 10% off discount code. But that's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you'll go and nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.